morning. I spoke a little bit about that, and then we also had Columbine. And Pete Visklosky came here, and he had the name of somebody, and he wasn't sure who that was. And that young man was named Matt Kechter. And Matt Kechter, because these families don't want their kids' lives to have been forgotten. They don't want all these deaths to be in vain. He was a football player.
You're listening to LUTG Radio's WKKP Digital Broadcasting.
Offensive lineman, defensive lineman. He, along with 11 other students and a teacher, were killed in Columbine. As a consequence, and I think this goes for Diana to get, well as Nate.
You're listening to LUTG Radio's WKKP Digital Broadcasting.
That we share with other members of Congress when they have a mass shooting in their district. When Newtown came, I talked to Elizabeth Esty and Chris Murphy what to expect. The memorials, the anniversaries, the visit by the president, the makeshift crosses and teddy bears, the money that would come in that may or may not go to the victims and their families, what to expect. Talked to Tim Hillskamp in Kansas. I talked to Pete Aguilar in San Bernardino. Talked to Corinne Brown just recently in Orlando as a way for them to be prepared and consoling and comforting the people of their district. I decided that I want to help my colleagues deal with these tragedies, but I want to stop these damn things from happening in the first place.
Right.
That's why we're here. That's why we've been doing this. And that's why we're asking for very simple things. No fly, no buy, background checks. And gee whiz, Mr. Speaker, give us a vote on letting us study this gun violence. Too many people have died. We don't want to let these names be forgotten. I thank my friends for bringing this to the attention of America. We're doing the right things. It's 3:40 here on the East Coast. We're going to stay here.
All right, so you guys, they are definitely staying, and we're going to keep the fight going. Again, I do apologize if you hear some of them use swear language. You know, we pretty much don't do that here on LUTG Radio, but I think he got a little bit more compassion, and sometimes people like to use those words as adjectives, and sometimes, well, they forget that those words don't mean anything positive. So while they're trying to do something positive, when they put that negative word in there, it kind of defeats the whole thing. You know what I mean? From a faith perspective, and even from a secular one. So whenever you, just a little thing here. Also, they had mentioned something about John Lewis. They said that John Lewis was the Alpha and the Omega of this thing, and they just meant that he started it and that he's going to finish it. But you want to be careful when you use those terms, because God is the author and the finisher of your faith, and of everything, actually. And so while I understood that John knew that, the person that was speaking that, he meant it in love, he didn't understand that. So whenever you hear people use terms and use Bible scriptures that are from God, about God, for God, you should pray for them, because they don't know what they're saying. They really don't. And so remember, God doesn't share his glory with anyone, period. And some people forget that, and they don't know that, or forget it, or they don't know. So don't get offended. Pray. Remember, pray. God will work through you to reach them, and he'll give them better words to use. You feel me? And so, you know, I know we all make mistakes, and we all may do something. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So we may say something out of the pocket, or start talking out the side of our neck, you know, meaning saying things that ain't proper. And so we can always get back on course. And so, for example, myself, I got out of pocket because some things was making me angry, and I was telling Jesus about it. And so after I talked to him, I got back on course. You feel me? And so that's how I do it. I gotta tell him, look, Jesus, this is what's happening. Blase Skippy. But for this thing at No Bill, No Break, these guys have been at it since I think 9 a.m. Washington time or something like that. They've been at it for a good while, and so they intend to go to daybreak. It's nighttime over there, and as well as there's people outside the Capitol still, from what I understand. So they all in it for the long haul, and so we're here with them. Amen. This is Kathy Brooks for LUTG Radio, WKKP Digital Broadcasting, Chicago, Illinois.
As we commit ourselves to addressing the hatefulness that exists in our country. Gabby goes on to say, the time before I was shot was a time of great political upheaval, just as the British politics were in the turmoil before Joe Cox's murder. For her, it was Brexit and the debate over whether Britain should leave the European Union. Here in the United States, I had campaigned for re-election in Arizona through a long, hot summer and fall dominated by debate over healthcare reform and colored by the emergence of the Tea Party. The glass door of our office in Tucson was smashed in just a few hours after I cast my vote in favor of the Affordable Care Act, and a man brought a gun to one of my town hall meetings. Politics didn't kill Joe Cox. A deranged man with a gun and a knife did, or injure me. But when some of the great democracies of the world are held hostage to extremist rhetoric and the fear of attacks on individuals, and when sick people have ready access to weaponry, we are all left safe. Gabby goes on to say, which brings me to Monday's night vote in the Senate. Now, this is again after the fact. The strong, well-funded gun lobby has ensured decades of inaction. Even in 2013, after the murder of children at Sandy Hook Elementary School, when 54 senators looked into my eyes and the eyes of the parents of the 20 kids who died there and still did nothing. Finally, last week, 40 senators, led by Chris Murphy, finally said, enough. Far into the night, as Americans like me watched with hope and pride, they brought the Senate to a halt, telling the stories of those taken by gun violence. Their insistence on action, fueled by the nearly 90%, their insistence on action, fueled by nearly 90% of Americans, including large majorities of Republicans and National Rifle Association members who support responsible solutions to make us safe, means that later Monday, senators will vote on two bills. One, the Feinstein Amendment to close the terror gap and give the Attorney General the right to prevent known or suspected terrorists from obtaining weapons. That makes sense, doesn't it? And two, the Murphy Amendment, which would require criminal background checks on all gun sales. With an untold number of gun sales now going unchecked, that legislation would strengthen our existing background check system and help prevent domestic abusers and felons from buying weapons. The Senate will also consider two bills by John Cornyn. She goes on to talk about those bills and to, let me just read what it says, which attempt to thread the needle responding to the overwhelming outcry from their constituents to do something while preserving the approval and support of the corporate gun lobby that will stop at nothing to protect its profits. Those two bills aim to provide a fig leaf, misleading Americans into thinking our opponents are addressing gun violence when they are not. The Senate should pass the Murphy and Feinstein proposals and reject the Cornyn and Grassley attempts at deception. Joe Cox and I learned while serving in office the fundamental truth of legislating in complex democracy. It's hard. It requires patience, tolerance, and the will to come together and do what's right, not what pleases the loudest and angriest people and the Washington lobbyists. Now it is time for lawmakers to retreat to their ideological corners and do nothing. Now is not the time for lawmakers to retreat to their ideological corners and do nothing. It is a time to stand shoulder to shoulder with the American people to make responsible changes that honor our history and our diversity and make our place a safer place to live. Gabrielle Giffords, a Democrat from Arizona, was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 2007 to 2012 and is a co-founder of Americans for Responsible Solutions. I think that I wanted to read this because Gabby has it all down here. What she talked about as far as the Senate bills are concerned are exactly the bills that we want to be passed. The Republicans will try to do some big league thing. I don't even know if they even try to do that in the House. In the House, they just say no. They just say no and go home in the dark of night. After we hear from some of our other colleagues, I have some other op-eds. One by John Feinblatt, who is the head of Every Town, Mark Mariel, head of the Urban Institute, and Evan Wolfson, who is he was the champion for marriage equality. And the three of them came together to do an op-ed, which perhaps one of you will do us the honor of reading, but we have plenty of statements that capture so much of this, written by people out there on the front line, and we all agree that Gabrielle is on the front line. With that, I invite Mr. Engel. Who is next? Is Barbara next? You were next.
I spoke before, and I just wanted to very briefly thank all of you and tell you how sincerely I feel that it's such an honor.
Sit in front of the periscope.
I'm really proud of our delegation. I'm really proud of the Democrats in the House, and it's just wonderful. Our side, the American people aren't stupid. They understand what sensible gun control laws are. No one of us is saying involved the Second Amendment. I believe in Second Amendment rights, but I also believe in doing what's right. And we simply cannot just have business as usual, day in and day out, while there's another tragedy, another tragedy, another tragedy. So I really feel energized. I feel that this is the start of something big. I think we should keep doing this, and I think the American people will understand that we feel as they do. As was said before, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle ran away in the dead of night, and it's really shameful that they did that. And all we're asking, I want to just emphasize this and then I'll close, is a vote. You vote yes or you vote no. If we lose the vote, the Democrats in the Senate lost the vote. We lose the vote, we lose the vote. But we need to have a vote. The American people demand nothing less, and neither do we. So again, thank you. Pleasure to serve with you. This is only the start. We're going to win because what we're doing is right, and the American people believe in what we believe. Thank you.
My colleagues, I truly believe that this is a defining moment for us as Democrats. We have shown the lack of courage, really, by the Republicans today. It has been unbelievable what they have done in terms of shutting this House down, going home, and not even allowing us to vote on these two very moderate measures. But you know what? I really think what we have done today will save the lives of so many people. What we have done today honors those whose lives were senselessly taken from us as a result of gun violence. I mentioned earlier a young lady, a 16-year-old, Reginae Jeffers, and I want to just say something about a couple of these young people who've been gunned down in my district. Reginae, her funeral will be in a few hours. She was 16 years old. She was at a vigil, a repast, right after the funeral of two of her friends who had drowned. 4 young people were shot right on 13th and Franklin Street in my district. My nephews were with the young people, and Reginae died. Antonio Ramos, he was 27 years old, an Oakland artist. He was killed while just completing a mural for the city of Oakland. Davon Ellis. Davon was killed last year. He was 14 years old, and he was walking with friends, one of which was my nephew down the street. Davon was killed. Actually, the two young men who drowned were walking with Davon and my nephew that day. Shamil Pierce. Shamil is 30 years old. She lived in West Oakland, and she was killed while shielding her children from gunfire. She was protecting her children, and she was killed. Torian Hughes, 17. He's the grandson of a council member, Lynette McElhaney. He was killed in a street robbery. I could go on and on and on. All of you know these stories in your districts very well. So what we have done today, once again, is just the beginning, but I think it's a wake-up call for the NRA and for their supporters, because no more are we going to allow them to run the show. And I'm confident that if we stay the course, if we stay here, if we be vigilant, and if we continue to let the American people know whose side we're on, because we are on their side, we're going to win this. We're going to win this, and we're going to get these weapons of war off of the streets of America. So I just have to, on behalf of my congressional district and my family, just say thank you all for being strong, being bold, and being vigilant and determined that we're going to get these guns out of the hands of those who can't fly yet can buy, and out of the hands of those who should have had background checks and haven't. And we need to pass those bills right away.
We, my colleagues, told the world, and I mean the world, that we would stay the night, and we intend to keep that promise. And we talked a lot about one of the most extraordinary and heroic colleagues that we've ever had, Gabby Giffords. Debbie Wasserman Schultz read her letter, and Leader Pelosi read her op-ed. But there was another congresswoman who also showed remarkable courage, and she's left us. And that was a former Congresswoman Carolyn McCarthy. She was a nurse, a Republican nurse on Long Island who wasn't involved in politics. And many of you remember her. One day, her husband and her son were returning home on the Long Island Railroad. Her husband never made it home. Her son didn't make it home. He made it to a hospital. They were slaughtered with dozens of other Long Islanders on the Long Island Railroad. And Carolyn McCarthy, a nurse, decided that she was going to try and do something about it. And she ran for Congress. She was a Republican. She realized that the Republicans were going to do nothing to stop the tragedy that befell her family from befalling other families. And so she became a Democrat, and she ran for Congress, and she served here with distinction. And she promised that she would serve for as long as she could to try and get some sensible gun safety legislation passed. Well, as many of you know, she fell ill 2 years ago. And she had to she struggled with the decision and finally made the decision that she would not run for re-election. And many of us talked to Carolyn McCarthy, and she said that her deepest regret was that she wasn't able to stay here long enough to pass some meaningful gun safety measure. Today, Carolyn McCarthy would be very proud of what you have done. Today, she would realize that we're probably closer than we've ever been to passing. Not everything we want to pass, but at least some common sense measure, like no fly, no buy. And so I know those of us who served with Carolyn want her to know that this fight was for her and her son, who is still alive and still struggles with his wounds. And I'll just say one other thing, and then yield to Mr. Deutsch. These Republicans, they did cut and run. And they cut and run in the dark of night. And they're all going to go to the airport tomorrow, and they're going to get on those TSA lines. And they're going to be protected. Because there's going to be a TSA agent who's going to look at their boarding pass and make sure that it's okay for they and their fellow passengers to get on a plane. So those members of Congress who left this floor, cut and run in the dark of night, those Republicans, they get protected. But they're not willing to protect their own constituents from somebody who may be a terrorist and may be on that list and wants to get a gun. And if that's not the height of cruel hypocrisy, I do not know what is. We're going to keep up this fight for as long as we can, for as long as we need to make sure that every one of our citizens is safe. And I am just so proud to be with you tonight and to be a Democrat tonight. Yield to Mr. Deutsch.
Thank you. My friends, I'm not sure there's anyone here who's ever heard me recite a poem. Lord knows I've never done it on the floor of the House. But it seems so appropriate to read this poem now. It's by Rudyard Kipling. It's called If. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired of waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the...
Okay, so we had a little technical difficulties here. Audio went out.
of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss and lose and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. This chamber tonight is full not just of men and women, but some of the finest men and women I've ever met in my life. And I'm so proud to have spent the past 17 hours with every one of you.
And we're not finished yet. We have more hours to go. I called Carolyn McCarthy today. I wanted her to know what we were doing. And I didn't catch her. She wasn't home, but I left the message on the phone and told her that we were standing up for the issue that she cared most about and dedicated her life towards changing. And I feel that she and so many Americans were inspired by what we did tonight.
My phone was ringing off the hook all day long, thanking the Democrats for finally standing up, for being determined, for making a difference. And I can tell you that I think we truly did make a difference. It's the first time that the GOP totally changed their plans, their schedule, turned themselves upside down, and adjourned 2 days early, because they would rather cut and leave than stay here and listen to all of us raising the injustice to the American people, the insanity of not passing sensible, fair gun safety laws that preserve the Second Amendment. And when you look at America, we are unique among countries in terms of the massive carnage and gun violence that happens in our country. Someone called from London and they said, we don't have that problem because we have sensible gun safety laws. Of course, they've had their own tragedies. But when you see that more people have died in American wars since 1968, more people have died from gun violence since 1968 than all of the people that died for our country in wars. How insane is that we're not taking these common sense, no buy, no fly, comprehensive background checks? These are reasonable, and I would say moderate, extremely moderate positions that in no way infringe on the Second Amendment. And I feel that in every movement there's a turning point. And I felt with every mass murder that was the turning point. After Gabby was shot, surely everybody in Congress will be so outraged they will do something. But they didn't. In Columbine, when the innocent children were mowed down in their school and their teachers, I thought that would be the turning point. The mowing, you can't even go to a movie theater without people being murdered. And with Orlando, I thought that would be the turning point. Surely we would act 100 people shot in a very short time, 50 of them dead. And that day, spontaneously, New Yorkers all went to Stonewall, the beginning, the site of the Stonewall Rebellion, the modern movement for gay rights in our country. And 15,000 people went to Stonewall to show their outrage and determination to make something happen. And I went there too, and I was thinking, this will be the turning point, like Stonewall. And I'm proud that in New York, two of the turning points in important civil rights movements started in New York, in Seneca Falls for the women's rights movement, at Stonewall for the gay rights and human rights movement. But I truly believe that the turning point is right here on the floor of Congress with the great Democratic Party that stood so strongly together in solidarity with the victims, with the families, what's right. And I feel that we have been that turning point. And I have never been more proud to be a Democrat, to be part of this unity that is working for the right things. I would say that rarely in politics are you allowed the opportunity to do something absolutely pure, absolutely beautiful and wonderful and just and righteous. And I feel we all had that opportunity tonight. So I want to thank my colleagues. I'm so proud to be part of your team, and I am standing with you. And I thank you for being the turning point in a movement to literally save lives in America. I thank you and yield back.
Because I'm interjecting these because I promised these folks that we would read them, and we also promised members that before anybody else got a second chance, other people would have the ability to come up here, and now I'm taking a second chance, but these are not my words. These are the words of Mark Morial, the CEO of the National Urban League. John Feinblatt, president of Everytown for Gun Safety. Evan Wolfson was founder and president of Freedom to Marry. They begin the title, Disarming Hate After Orlando. At long last, we must take responsible steps to stop the bloodshed.
It looks like we may have lost the feed a little bit. I was trying to reconnect.
Freedom. And now, tragically, we know each is a place where Americans can be targeted, shot, and killed simply for going about their daily lives. Hate fueled each of the attacks on Charleston, Colorado Springs, and Orlando. Another common denominator, that hate crime became lethal only because it is far too easy for dangerous people, terrorists and felons, abusers and bigots to access guns in this country. Messrs. Feinblatt, Morial, and Wilson go on to say, and the predictable result when hatred is armed, carnage. America's gun murder rate is more than 25 times that of other developed countries. There is no single policy that will bring that number in line with the rest of the civilized world, but if we're going to do something, then we have to start by asking ourselves a simple question. What kind of country do we want to live in? After the deadliest mass shooting in our history, we have to decide. Do we want a country where we cannot safely pray, see a doctor, or go out with friends? We are a nation whose history is freedom. Now we increasingly find that freedom yanked away from us and our most basic rights to life and liberty under attack. The gentlemen go on to say, of course, there is no guarantee against the next attack. Requiring background checks on all gun sales, though, would be the most immediate effective way to keep guns out of dangerous hands. The U.S. Senate tried to enact background checks after the 2012 murder shootings in Newtown, but NRA lobbyists and their allies in Congress blocked background checks then, and they continue to block them now. For the gun lobby and its allies, the answer to gun violence is not a stronger, smarter policy. Their answer is always more guns. So they push for guns everywhere, in our churches, schools, airports, bars, and restaurants. They push for guns for everyone, including terror suspects. And they do it despite the warnings of law enforcement who know best how to safeguard the public and is not with armed vigilantes. That is the gun lobby's vision of America. That is how extreme, indeed how un-American they have become, the gentlemen say. Consider the so-called terror gap, which Congress, at the behest of the NRA's lobby machine, refuses to close. Right now, a suspect on federal terror watch list may not be allowed to board a plane, but there is nothing stopping him or her from buying a gun. This is not conjecture. Since 2004, terror suspects have bought guns more than 2,000 times. The 2009 Fort Hood shooter passed a background check, bought a gun, and shot 45 people, even as he was under FBI investigation for links to terrorism. The Orlando shooter was twice placed on a terror watch list in the last few years. He was investigated by the FBI as a terror suspect and had a history of making violent, bigoted threats. Proposed terror gap legislation could have given law enforcement the discretion to block a gun sale to him. Authorities could have flagged his attempted purchase, reviewed his file, and looked into his recent threats. They could have determined he posed a terrorist threat and denied the gun sale. And yet, the legislation to give the government that authority hasn't moved. There is a glaring weakness in our national defense. There is bipartisan support in Congress for shoring it up, and yet the gun lobby continues to play politics. After the deadliest terror attack since 9/11, we should not let the gun lobby get away with the same old games. Lives are at stake, and to sit idly by while white political extremists put us at risk is unacceptable. The American people are united in mourning, in anger, and in deep gratitude for the police and first responders who rushed into danger and saved lives Sunday morning. We are united too, the gentlemen say, Mr. Feinblatt, Mr. Morial, and Mr. Wolfson say, we are united too in the conviction that those first responders and the people they serve, we the people, all deserve better. It is insane that we live in a country when terror suspects and criminals, including those convicted of hate crimes, can easily buy guns. It is intolerable that in our country, armed hatred is now the new normal. And it is unacceptable that our lawmakers protect and promote the gun lobby's vision over our own lives and liberties. Each of us condemns violence in all forms. Together, we are also calling for action from those policymakers who, falsely and for far too long, have excused terror, bloodshed, and lax gun laws at the cost of freedom. Again, Mr. Feinblatt is the president of Everytown for Gun Safety. Mark Morial is the CEO of the National Urban League. Mr. Wolfson was founder and president of Freedom to Marry. If we had a record, I would submit it for the record, but it is now on the public record. Yield to Mr. Biden.
Good morning.
Good
morning. Ms. McGoon, thank all of you for staying here. I know how exhausted all of us are. And I particularly want to thank the many women here because it's cold in here.
It's freezing.
And I know that you're usually cold anyway. Ms. Jackson Lee was smart enough to bring a blanket. It's a good thing. While we're talking guns, one of the great ironies and hypocrisies that I find again and again is that the NRA always says, we just want to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and the dangerously mentally ill.
Right.
And we don't need any new gun laws. We just need to enforce the laws that are already on the books. My Virginia colleague, Bob Goodlatte, chairs the House Judiciary Committee. And after the recent tragedy in Roanoke where the deranged guy shot the reporter and the cameraman on Bob was all over the newspapers saying, we don't need any new gun laws. We just need to enforce the laws that are already on the books. Okay. And let me quote him, paraphrase quote, the federal government does a terrible job at enforcing these federal gun laws. Well, if we looked a little deeper into this, we find that we have gutted the ATF.
Right.
There's at least 5 things we can do with the ATF right now without changing any new gun laws. Number 1, we can make the ATF director not subject to a Senate appointment. Mm-hmm. Since the Republicans did that in 2004, only one ATF director in 12 years has actually been confirmed by the U.S. Senate. When you take an organization and you leave it leaderless with an ad hoc, with an acting director, you're never going to have the kind of enforcement that you want. Let's make the ATF director simply an appointee of the Attorney General, not subject to confirmation, and give it leadership. Number 2, let's repeal the TR amendments, going back to 2004 also, which restrict the use of trace data. Trace data is an incredibly important tool to be able to figure out which guns are used in crimes and to lead them back to the gun shops from which they were sold. Number 3, let's require annual inspections of every federally licensed gun shop in America. One of the amazing statistics, there are more federally certified gun shops in America than there are McDonald's. I think it's over 70,000. Number 4, let's make sure that if we're going to do annual inspections of each one of these gun shops, that we have the workforce to do it. Right now, the ATF is desperately shorthanded to do the job that they're assigned to do by federal law. And finally, Congress has restricted the ability of federal gun shops to keep inventories. And this is incredibly important. You have a big inventory, you miss 20 guns or 100 guns, no one knows because they're restricted from keeping those inventories. There's much that we can do right now that doesn't add a new level that just enforces existing law. But in keeping with the refusal to have a vote on no-fly, no-buy, refusal to have a vote on closing the background check loop, there is legislation before us that many of you have signed, the ATF Enforcement Act, that once again is not getting a hearing in House Judiciary, is not getting a markup, is not getting any play on the floor. So even the things they say, let's enforce laws that exist, doesn't happen. There's so much more that we can do. And thank all of you for being part of this overnight and extended effort to make sure that we continue to demand what the American citizens want. Thank you, and I yield my good pleasure.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
The horrific mass shooting that took place on June 12th at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando.
You're listening to
is a stark
LUTG
reminder
Radio's
of the urgent
WKKP
responsibility that we
Digital
have
Broadcasting.
in this country. The shooter in Orlando used an assault rifle that is virtually identical to the ones used by mass killers in San Bernardino.
You're listening to LUTG Radio's WKKP Digital Broadcasting.
We had two proposals that were made, which were bipartisan, which are currently pending before the Congress. Two very simple ideas, but which would be very effective in helping to protect our constituents from gun violence. First is universal background checks. Legislation to ensure that anytime someone buys a gun, they undergo a background check to be certain that they're not a criminal, a terrorist, domestic abuser, or someone else who is prohibited from purchasing that firearm. And the second is to make sure that when an individual is determined to be so dangerous that they're denied the ability to get on an airplane, that they don't have the right to go into a gun store and buy as many guns as they want. And in fact, from 2004 to 2014, more than 2,000 suspected terrorists bought firearms legally in this country. And they're going to continue to do this unless we pass a law to stop them. And think about this, until 9/11, bombs were the weapons of choice for terrorists looking to harm America. But in the 15 years since then, 95% of terror deaths that took place in the United States resulted from gunfire. So we know that that is the greatest danger to the American people, terrorists in possession of a gun, and we have no prohibition against individuals who are on the terrorist watch list from buying as many guns as they want. We have voted 13 times, or tried to vote into a law, the no-fly, no-buy proposal that was offered. And 13 times our Republican colleagues have blocked our ability to do that. What are they afraid of? That we're actually going to deny terrorists the right to buy a gun? This is common sense. The American people cannot believe it is possible for someone that is on the terrorist watch list that has been determined to be so dangerous can go in and buy as many guns as he or she wants. This is a no-brainer. And we also know from all of the research that the background checks, when they are conducted, they work. On average, every day, background checks block 171 attempted purchases of firearms by felons, 48 attempted purchases by domestic abusers, and 19 attempted purchases by fugitives. So this is an effective way to make sure guns do not get into the hands of people who should not have them. We have legislation to strengthen that and make sure we close all the loopholes so every sale of a gun is subjected to a background check. And our Republican colleagues won't take that bill up either. And so while we have spent the last almost 17 hours now on the floor of the House, literally on this floor and in this chamber, imploring our colleagues to take some action to respond to the carnage that is displayed in these photographs, the beautiful lives taken away. What they did instead of engaging with us about these solutions or responding to these two very sensible pieces of legislation is they adjourned. They left without ever taking these up. What a horrible message that is to the American people, that the kind of harm and heartache and grief that so many people have suffered in our country because of gun violence, that the Republican answer to that is, we'll see you in July. And so what I'd like to do is just take a moment We could do this for virtually every mass shooting in our country, because these are real people who have families and lives, and they get lost in all these statistics. And so what I'd like to do is take a moment and tell you a little bit about the victims in Orlando, and just give you a little bit of background. First, Edward Sotomayor, 34 years old, from Sarasota, Florida. According to multiple social media profiles, Mr. Sotomayor worked as the national brand manager for Allen Chuck Travel, which describes itself as part of America's largest gay-owned travel company. In an interview with the Associated Press, David Sotomayor, who identified himself as Mr. Sotomayor's cousin, said, Edward was a, quote, caring and energetic man. Christina Copelli, who lives in Vienna, was on 3 cruises with Mr. Sotomayor, and she says he was lovely, a kind guy, who touched everyone who had the pleasure of meeting him. I can't believe he's gone. Stanley Almodovar III, 23 years old, Claremont, Florida. Mr. Almodovar worked as a pharmacy technician. He made me feel like he was perfectly fine being who I was, Mr. Almodovar's friend Hayes Ramirez told the 2A. She said they met at Pulse and clicked instantly. You would know Stanley entered a room, she said. He could turn my mood by conversation. Juan Ramon Guerrero, 22 years old. Mr. Guerrero had recently begun attending the University of Central Florida and had only recently come out to his family as gay. In a conversation with the news service, his cousin Robert Guerrero said he opened up to his family just before the start of the year. Quote, he was always this amazing person. He was like a big brother to me. Robert Guerrero told the AP he was never the type to go out to parties, would rather stay home and care for his niece and nephew. Eric Ivan Ortiz Rivera, 36 years old, Orlando, Florida. Mr. Ortiz Rivera was the man everyone in his family asked for design advice, his cousin Orlando Gonzalez said. He was very artistic, Mr. Gonzalez told the Times. He was all about interior design. The paper reports that this 36-year-old goofball, Gonzalez's words, lived in downtown Orlando with his husband. Luis Velma, 22 years old, Sanford, Florida. Luis Velma was by far the best person I knew, his friend Will Randall told the Miami Herald. He inherently made us all better people by simply existing around us. Part of him will always live on in every good decision I make. According to his Facebook page, he worked at the University Studios in Orlando, including the Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey ride. Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling mourned him on Twitter. Peter Gonzalez Cruz, 22 years old. Peter Gonzalez Cruz went by Omi, his aunt said. Peter makes a difference everywhere he goes.
still tap the heart saying you also share. The scope will give you a retweet for all shares. And so thank you guys for that. Those of you that are jumping in, if you would tap the screen, let me know that you do have contact. Let me know that you do have.
Isaac.